in the year 2023 alone, the UK spent, I know it was in billions of pounds on congestion charges.
Yeah, all grid following is probably not the answer, and all grid forming is not the answer either. It is somewhere in between. Neither extreme is each extreme has its own weaknesses, and there is a sweet spot in the middle. That's what we're doing.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Guidetryb Podcast. In the previous episode with Professor Bialek, the link to that episode is in the description. We explored power system blackouts. That's moments when electricity systems fail, sometimes dramatically. And today we are turning the lens in the opposite direction, trying to be more optimistic. So instead of asking what goes wrong, we're trying to ask a more hopeful question. So can we operate the power systems reliably with a very high penetration of renewable energy or inverter-based resources? For many people, that idea still sounds risky or unrealistic. Can the lights really stay on when most of the electricity comes from wind and solar? Can modern grids remain stable without large spinning machines? And can markets, technology, and policy evolve quickly enough to support the transition? The encouraging news is that this future isn't hypothetical, it's already happening. And to guide us through this, I'm joined by Professor Mark O'Malley, one of the world's leading experts on power system operation with high levels of renewable energy. Professor O'Malley is a Liverpool Professor of Power Systems at Imperial College London. He's a co-founder of the Global Power Systems Transformation Consortium, GPST, and the Global Director of the Electric Power Innovation for a Carbon-Free Society, EPICS Center. He's recognized as a world authority in energy systems integration and grid integration of renewable energy. He works closely and collaboratively with industry researchers across the globe in a multitude of disciplines. And his published works have been cited over 27,000 times and have shaped how system operators think about stability, flexibility, and reliability in low-inertia grids. He has advised governments, regulators, and system operators globally on how to safely operate power systems with extremely high shares of wind and solar energy. So, Professor O'Malley, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Father.
So just as a way to transit into the conversation, what initially drew you to power systems and energy? And after several decades of working in this field, do you have any reflections or regrets?
What drew me to power systems engineering? I did a PhD actually in circuits and systems. I didn't do a PhD in power systems. I'm an electrical power engineering undergrad, but I did a PhD in circuits and systems. So that's the first thing. I wasn't initially a sort of a trained PhD in power engineering, a trained PhD in circuits and systems. But circuits and systems is the sort of the foundational discipline of a lot of electrical engineering. So it wasn't a big step to go to power systems. And my undergrad was in power systems. I suppose what drew me was just opportunity. The local utility in Ireland, the ESB, came to the department where I was in University College Dublin, and said they'd like to explore setting up some sort of research group in power engineering. I was young academic, an area I knew about. It's close enough to circuits and systems, and the rest is history. That's what got me into it. Opportunity, just. I tend to go with the flow. I tend not to plan things. I tend to just take things as they are.
I think that's
any regrets? You asked any regrets?
Yeah, or reflections.
So I have no regrets at all. Reflections. Maybe this is not a. I'm glad you put Yanis in the sort of the category of the dark and me in the positive. But I suppose a reflection on it all in the academic sense is, I think this is a very tough business now for younger academics. I think it's much tougher than it was for me. I'd have to say that. I think, so I'm not here to put people off, but I think that's just a reality. I think that things have changed in a way that I think it's a very tough job to be a power system engineering academic in general. So that's a reflection. Unfortunately, a little bit.
Yes, thank you for being candid, because I was going to ask how your decision would have changed if you were to do it all over again. Right now,
Well, my own son is a PhD in electrical power engineering from ETH in Zurich.
Wow.
And I'm very glad that he's not in academia.
Really?
Yeah.
So
he's in industry.
Okay. You'd rather advise going into the industry than in academia?
Well, I didn't advise him. I mean, that's what he did. I mean, whether I would go into industry now or not, I don't know. I mean, I don't think my characteristics are suitable to industry. I'm very independent. So I like the academic life because it's incredibly independent. But look, we don't know. There's no way of knowing what would have happened, but I do believe that it's much more difficult now. It's a much more difficult job because it's people are requiring you to be a good scholar, a good teacher, a good administrator, a good fundraiser, and the workload is crazy, and it's just a tough business to be in.
And you founded initiatives like the GPST and EPICS, and these initiatives help to solve a key problem, which is the fact that the different players in this field used to operate in silos. And the GPST, that's the Global Power Systems Transformation Consortium, and EPICS, Electric Power Innovation for a Carbon-Free Society, helps to bring the various players together. So how can students and young professionals adopt that same collaborative mindset early enough in their careers?
So I think you have to understand where this came from. So if you go back to your first question as to how I ended up in this area, I ended up because the ESB came to the university and wanted to set something up. And that sort of was the start of a collaboration with industry from the very start. And that grew then into a collaboration, not just with the ESB, but with other people in the industry. And that collaborative, which I think was sparked off by their initiative, if you know what I mean, made me realize that that was a very important thing to do, the right, to attack the right problems, etc. That grew from there into a thing called the Electricity Research Centre in University College Dublin, which tried for 25 years, incredibly successful. It's where most of my academic career was spent. So I learned from a young age, very young, that working with industry and with other people is very, very important. So that's really the EPICS GPST. But GPST is really just GPST is a global version of what I did in University College. So there's nothing different in it. And I suppose I learned by doing. I found that they had real problems. They supported the research. It was good to tackle real problems, and it was just a very good environment to be in. So I've tended to learn from that. So I think too many academics work in silos. And the problems now that you mentioned at the start is so huge, so big. It's a complete transformation of everything from the technical to the economic to the regulatory, etc. That you cannot work in it in silos. You have to work together. And the global aspect has come about because that's the other thing during my career. I also, for whatever reason, spent an awful lot of time outside Ireland, where I was sort of spent a lot of my career, because the world's a big place. So I spent at least 4 times in the US on sabbatical.
Wow.
So it's that sort of training of I got from the very start.
It gave you a very global mindset.
Yes, very global.
But apart from that unique place where EPICS and GPST sit, energy sits at a difficult intersection between science, engineering, and politics. So policies can change as quickly as governments change, right? And that can abruptly reshape funding and priorities. So how should young professionals navigate that uncertainty while doing rigorous, meaningful work? Where does the politics end for the science to begin?
So you're right. Power engineering is definitely not just technical. It's obviously my area is technical and your area, Fatter, is technical, but it sits within. Electricity is not just like any other sort of industry. It is fundamental to life. So a lot of politics are involved. I don't think society would allow electricity to be just a free market, completely no holds barred. I think they will always regulate it in some way. How to navigate that? Well, how to navigate that is, if you work closely with all these people, you'll have a sense of where it's going. So you want to navigate that, and if you have good foresight. So if you're stuck in a silo and you don't know what's going on in the industry, and all of a sudden it changes, you could be left stranded in some way. But if you're close to it, you'll see the way it's changing, and you can adapt. So adaptation.
How about politics? How about a new government coming in and having a radically different policy and withdrawing funding and reshaping priorities, and 4 years after that, another government comes in and does it. So what?
Well, that's never happened to me personally. I've been very lucky in Ireland. The support for renewable energy and the energy transition started off weakish, but has grown, and is very consistent. And I'm now in the UK. It's pretty consistent here as well. I have spent time in the United States, as you know, as in chief scientist at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and I think you're referring somewhat to what's going on in the United States. It's very difficult for people, and I've noticed it's had a huge impact on a lot of my colleagues in the US. That when there's a change of government, complete change of direction, it has a huge impact on funding. So I've never had to navigate it, though. I've been lucky. but at the same time, it is an enormously, in fact, it's very damaging to the area because, I mean, it's hard enough to get people into power engineering because we tend to compete with AI and all these other areas. They tend to be much more trendy and sexy jobs. They tend to pay more as well. And now all of a sudden you got this situation where the industry we're in or the academic area we're in all of a sudden has political uncertainty. So it's going to make it more difficult to get people.
Mm-hmm.
But the industry who are driving this, it just means that they're going to have to pay more. It's that simple. So that's one of the other issues as well, because electricity is almost like a, I mean, it is an industry. It does have a market. It does have money flows. It is sort of commercial. It, in many ways, it's not commercial because, electricity is so fundamental to life. But because of that, the ability to earn large amounts of money is limited. And this is stifling people from getting into the area.
Yeah.
I don't think everyone should get into it for money, but at the same time, money talks, bullshit walks.
All right. Now, how far along this road is the United Kingdom in comparison to other first world nations, if I can use that terminology?
Yeah. So, I mean, I pride myself in the fact that I know the world pretty well. I've worked in the US, I've worked in Ireland, and I've spent a lot of time in a lot of countries around the world. I'm just back from China and from Australia. So I do know it pretty well, and I work with a lot of people around the world. I'd have to say I think the UK power system is probably the most advanced in the world. That would be my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm being objective about it. At one stage, the Irish power system, I think, was the most advanced in the world, but I think it's lost that position. And that's because renewables has grown in lots of other countries, and the other countries have now come up against the same barriers as Ireland. I think the UK power system is probably the most advanced in the world. They're very innovative. They seem to lead the world in lots of the technical innovations, etc. The UK does have an advantage over a lot of other places in the world. I mean, it has nuclear as a base, which is helpful.
So very good.
But I think the UK power system is very advanced, and it's well ahead.
I think it has recently recorded a very high penetration of wind energy.
Yeah,
maybe the highest in the world. But how about the problems that come as a result of this? For example, I think I recall listening to a presentation by someone very high up in NISO. And I think in the year 2023 alone, the UK spent, I know it was in billions of pounds on congestion charges.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of wind in the north, in Scotland.
Yeah.
So lots of wind farms over there. But then most of the demand is in the south. So you have to transfer this energy along very long distances. And the transmission lines have, a limit to the amount of energy that can be transferred. So there's the charges that come with paying some of the wind farms to ramp down and then paying other generators to ramp up. And if you spend £3 billion, that amount trickles down to the electricity bills of ordinary people. So there's a high penetration of renewable energy, but the cost of electricity and energy in general keeps increasing.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that? Is it a blessing or a curse?
So I know exactly the issues you're talking about, but in terms of my own work and detail work I do, I'm not very familiar with exactly what's happening. I know roughly what's happening. I know that balancing costs in the UK are very high and getting higher. And I know that there's definitely physical congestion between the north and south, and these all add to the cost. There's no doubt about that. And in fact, I'd say one thing, there was a proposal recently that the UK go to locational marginal pricing, for example, which I think would have been hugely beneficial, right? It would have sent the right price signals, etc. But politics, again, interfered, and for some reason they didn't do it. And this is probably going to possibly add to the costs. Not so much that the physics has changed, it's just that if you allocate the costs to those who can best manage them, you'll get a better outcome than if you allocate the cost somewhere else. So I think what's going to happen is the fact that they didn't go to location marginal pricing is going to add to this. The whole cost of electricity in the UK is a big issue to lots of people talking about it. And again, I'm not extremely close to it. But from what I can see, it's perfectly understandable why it's high. Part of it is because of congestion, etc. But part of it is because it seems to be a bit of a mess. There seems to be so many cooks in the kitchen that there seems to be so many organizations involved. To me, just looking and standing outside, it just seems very complicated, much more complicated than it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And when you
I
talk,
think so, and one other thing as well. I think the thing is the society needs to understand if it wants clean energy, it's going to have to allow the building of transmission, and that is the number one message for sure. I can say that with confidence that if you can build transmission easily, then a lot of these problems, I don't say they will all disappear, but a lot of these problems will become easier to solve. And
I think
that
so
is a
too.
huge problem with
I think so
the
too.
UK.
So now when you talk about locational marginal pricing, that brings in the question of markets, right? So
Yeah.
we have the physics and we have the markets and we have the general area of services. So what does it mean in practice to move from stability provided by synchronous generators to the one that is explicitly defined in low inertia power systems? So previously stability was a characteristic of a synchronous generator, but now it has become a commodity that can be procured. So that transition from the implicit stability provided by synchronous machines to the explicitly defined system services. What does that look like in reality?
So that is one of the that's working itself out through the system now. Nobody really knows how that'll end. I mean, I think that's genuinely true. Nobody really knows how that'll end. Got synchronous generators. They, like you said, they implicitly had a lot of these characteristics, so you didn't have to go and procure them. Now you have the inverter-based resources. They do not inherently have a lot of these characteristics. You have to either build them in or ask for them. So and in a market environment that we're in, you have to then encourage them or reward them, etc. So again, it's adding to the complexity. I mean, I think this might sound a bit radical, but in many ways, the electricity markets as such were sort of started to become the norm maybe 40 years ago, or they started out maybe even longer. I think they started first in Chile. But anyway, the advent of electricity markets and this so-called deregulation. The reason I do that is because I don't think it was deregulated. I think it was even regulated more. But nonetheless, electricity markets came in. The transition towards that 20 years ago, and now with this energy transition on top of it, is not exactly the best way to do it. In many ways, we should have not deregulated the markets and decarbonized first, and then bring in the markets. And the reason is because decarbonization is so complex. Having it all under one monopoly might have actually been an easier way to do it and less complex. And then you could introduce the markets. But look, reality is you have the markets, you have a lot of players, a lot of actors, and therefore you're going to have to sort of deal with it. So I think it's more complex than it could have been.
Mm-hmm. And now it's almost difficult to reverse the.
Oh, it is. I mean, sorry, I'm not saying we should go backwards. I'm simply making the observation that I think it might have been easier.
Yeah. So what does for maybe for a non-technical listener, when we talk about electricity markets, what does it look like? This is a market where energy is traded between the people who produce it and the people who need it, and then it's also regulated. So what does that look like, and what market signals do you think that the current ecosystem is lacking that can help foster the procurement of system services better?
So how do you mean by what does it look like?
So what exactly is the electricity market?
Yes, the electricity market is just a mechanism whereby generators who produce electricity sell it either directly, indirectly, or various mechanisms to the consumer. The whole idea being, of course, that if there's market, there's a competition, and therefore competitive forces should drive down the costs of the generation, which should help have a lower price for the consumer. That's the whole theory. I mean, the complexity in between those statements is immense, though.
Yes.
And the other thing about it is that in different parts of the world, like for example, most of the world do not have electricity markets, right? They're not the norm. They're actually the exception.
Well, is that really the case?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, because I think I never really heard about the electricity markets back in my home country.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm pretty sure, like, you're from Africa, so I don't know if there's too many markets in Africa. I'm not sure if I think South Africa might have some sort of fledgling market. Yeah, no, I would. Well, hold on. I'd say on a population basis, I'd say most people live in countries or regions where there's no electricity market. On a volume basis, maybe, because most of the markets tend to be in the much more developed world, which use much more electricity. But look, I think the basic thing is a lot of the world do not have electricity markets. That's for sure. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of the world do have electricity markets, and from the uninitiated or the sort of the non-expert, they look like they're all completely different, but in reality, they're all the same in some way. They're all still trying to do the same thing, which is electricity is produced, they sell it to the customer, some sort of market price exists, and the services that you talked about are all the technical issues in between that are necessary to make all this work. And if they're not there, the system is not reliable. Now, the question that you rose earlier was, with inverter-based resources now coming along, displacing synchronous generators, you're probably going to have to take more of these services that were inherent and put them into some sort of market setting or of such, making things more complicated.
A lot more
complicated. And in fact, I'd go even further, we still don't even know what the physics is. Mm-hmm. So you really can't design a market till you know what the physics is. You can't put in a market without understanding the physics. So I think that in many ways, a lot of work to be done. And when I came to Imperial first 3.5 years ago, as a Leverhulme professor on this, I have this big project on services, I envisaged myself working mainly on you said at the start, I've worked in many areas of power systems, but I was mainly going to work on the sort of the interface between the physics and the markets, which is where the services are. But I found that a lot of my work has been dragged right down into the physics because a lot of that is not so, there's no point in trying to solve a problem at the services level if the physics is not solved. So I never envisaged that some of my PhD students would be running PSCAD, for example. I didn't think that was going to happen, but they are, because I think a lot of the physics is not. So I think we still have to solve a lot of the physics, a lot of the stability issues. Until we know how to operate a power system reliably physically, there's no point in trying to develop services on top of that to sell, because you don't know what you're selling.
Yes, I think that is exciting, because here we have generators that operate and have physical characteristics, and we need to understand the physics in order to turn those physical characteristics into products that can be sold on the market. So I think it's very exciting.
Well, you don't have to sell everything on the market, Fatter. I mean, that's another thing. This idea that everything should be in the market is not also true.
Then how can it be procured?
Well, you can, you can mandate it. I mean, what's the point in having a product that is so small in volume but incredibly important? Because what's the point in having a market for that? It doesn't make sense. Markets only work when there's fluid. In a market to work, I'm not an economist.
There needs to be volume, definitely.
Exactly. So I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to say I'm an expert in this. But basically, if you want a market to work, you have to have fluidity, and you have to have lots of players and whatever to get a good competitive environment. If what you're looking for is incredibly a small volume, what's the point in having a market for it? It doesn't make any real sense. So I think this is the other decision that we're going to have to make, is what products will benefit from markets, because in a market you get innovation, and you get price discovery, and you get competition, etc. So you should be able to drive down prices, but then there's other products, so to speak, that are so small in volume that market doesn't, it's not going to help in any way, and you might just mandate them.
Yes.
So and that might be different in different circumstances. Different systems that have different physical characteristics might end up differently. So I'm no details, but a system with lots of hydro, or one with lots of nuclear, or one with lots of long transmission lines, they'll all have different technical characteristics, and therefore what products and services are in the market and what are mandated might be different.
This is going to be hugely complicated, but I think
I think the other thing about it is, I think that this idea of learning from one system to the other, I think will become, I'm an advocate of it, but I think it becomes more difficult, because I think that what's going to happen is, with renewables, because every country region has its own mix of renewables, its own setup, I think what that means is that every single system will start to look much more different than they are now. Because I think in the past, the commonality was they all had, not all, largely speaking, they had large synchronous generators, and gas or oil or coal was the main fuel. So they shared a huge amount of characteristics. But now that's changed. Each system is going to start a little bit more different. And therefore, I think that this idea of learning from one another, I think still fundamentally holds, but isn't in detail, it may not be. I think we're going to have different, I think that the diversity of the power systems will be more diverse.
Mm-hmm. I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about grid forming inverters, because they've been presented as a key enabler for the 100% operation. And then based on the work of EPICS and GPST, how close are we to relying on them at scale? And what are the main technical operational challenges that still need to be resolved? Do we have entire GFM maybe at megawatt or gigawatt scale, currently operational or in testing, and are they close to being mainstream?
So I think go back to the start of this interview, or when I came to Imperial 3.5 years ago. One of the reasons I came to Imperial, not the only reason, but one of the reasons, it was because of the people like at Imperial. We have Tim Green, who's power electronics, Belarko Chowdhury, who's, I'd say Belarko is somewhere halfway between power electronics and power systems, whatever. And I'm mainly on power systems, so I am not the expert in grid forming inverters. I think that Tim and Belarko would definitely, and Yunji and others would hold that. But I do, from a sort of a power system point of view, have an opinion on this. So I think lots of people have talked about grid forming. It's very topical at the moment. But to be honest with you, I heard someone say the other day in a phone call, and I think they were quite right, is there's a little bit too much talk about them at this stage. They're important. We need to get them to work, but there's lots of other things that need to be worked too. And again, one of the big questions in the GPST research agenda, the GPST has this research agenda, all these research questions. One of the big questions in there is, what's the ratio of grid forming to grid following? And that's just an unknown. And in fact, that ratio is almost certainly going to be different in different systems, for what I said earlier. So, how close are we to this? There's lots of, as far as I know, I think in Australia they've put in some big grid forming inverters, and I think in Texas they are too. So various places in the world are definitely deploying grid forming inverters at reasonable scale, and they're starting to learn from them, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah. I think sometimes you also get the feeling that everyone kind of implicitly agrees that grid forming is the answer to every question. So
No,
like,
it's
okay,
not.
grid forming is the answer.
No,
Now, what's the question?
No.
Yeah. Yes, I think.
No. There's far too many people saying that, Father. Far too many people. And again, I think, and I've learned a lot from Tim and Belarko. I mean, all grid following is probably not the answer, and all grid forming is not the answer either. It is somewhere in between. Neither extreme is each extreme has its own weaknesses, and there is a sweet spot in the middle. That's what we're trying to find. And from your own area, that the protection comes in there too, which makes things even more complicated.
Yes. So there's so much to do in this field generally, and so we'll definitely need a lot of people coming in, and hopefully government.
Good people like you.
Hopefully, government and companies can provide incentives. And I just want to wrap up with a series of quick fire questions.
Sure.
So I'll just ask, for quick answers. What is one technology people overhype in the energy transition? Maybe you just answered
Hydrogen.
Hydrogen. I think so. And what is one technology people underestimate?
One technology that people underestimate: transmission.
Oh, yes. Grid forming inverters, essential or just helpful? I think you just answered it.
Yeah, there's somewhere in the middle.
Okay. What's a harder problem, technology or markets?
Technology is the harder problem.
Oh, definitely. We first have to understand the technology before we create the markets.
It comes before the market, and then the market. I'm not saying the market's a trivial. Well, I was at a meeting in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and there was some market people talking, and what really gets me about the market thing is they keep on addressing the weaknesses in the market, and it seems to go in cycles, and it never seems to iterate to anything, which I find very dissatisfying. Whereas in engineering, we tend to solve a problem, and that's it.
Yes.
But look, I think the markets are complex, but if you don't solve the physics first, you don't get anywhere. So
is that because it's difficult to have a tangible solution to a market problem?
No,
or
I think
with engineering you can solve it and see it work.
I think and again, I'm not an economist, so I have to be careful here. I think the weakness in economics has not come up with all the relevant theories, essentially, and fundamentals to really back up the design of electricity market. Electricity markets are totally different than anything else. The product is not storable, it's in real time. It's also stuck in this environment of government and regulation and things like that. So it's not really a free market. So I think all those things act to make it very difficult to have an electricity market that sort of evolves into something that's sort of, what's the word? It evolves into something that's constant, if you know what I mean. So I think the theory is not there. And I think the regulation and all the governments tend to interfere with things.
So what's the best real world example of a power system doing things right today? I think you already gave.
What is the best
real world example of a power system doing things right today?
Yeah, well, I think the UK is doing pretty well, but I think a lot of them are doing pretty well. I think the power systems that are doing really well in renewables ERCOT, Australia, the UK, Denmark, Ireland, they're all doing very well.
Mhm.
But they are, they're up
Only
against
will be
some
high.
very, very tough challenges, whatever. I don't think there's any. I think China is doing extremely well. You have to take your hat off to them.
Even with the coal, I think they
Mm.
burn lots of coal till today.
Yeah, but I think, and I could have this statistic wrong, but I was told this by Charlie Smith, who's a very good friend of mine. He came back from China the other day. I was in China myself a couple of weeks ago. Charlie said that China installed more wind was installed in China in 2025 than is the total capacity installed in the US.
Really?
Now, that statistic is just whether that's true or not, but I know that China is.
They're doing a lot of wind.
They're putting huge amounts of wind and solar. And yeah, they have lots of coal. But look, you have to admire what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. What's the biggest misconception about 100% renewable grids?
Biggest misconception, 100% renewable grids is something I've tried to avoid as a statement because it's controversial. And on one side of the equation, you have a bunch of people who say it's impossible, and the other side of the equation, you have a bunch of people who say it's easy. And unfortunately, they have polluted the environment, so to speak, with particularly the academic literature full of a lot of rubbish. But the reality is, and one of the reasons, ESIG is an organization that I've been involved with in my past. ESIG held a meeting in 2019 or 2018, 2019, I think. 2018 or 2019 in Denver when I was the chief scientist at NREL and we called the meeting towards 100%. We didn't say 100% because we felt that's controversial. To really look at the technical challenges of getting there. And while it's not easy, it's not impossible. It's somewhere in between. And that's the really key issue. Far too many people think far too many people come down on saying it's easy or it's impossible.
It seems the biggest misconception about the 100% renewable grids is that it's not 100%.
That it's not 100%.
Yes, it doesn't get to 100% renewables. It goes towards 100%.
Yeah. I think that's the better way to think about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if you go to 100%, you get this debate that doesn't go anywhere. And let's be clear about it, we're a long way from it in a lot of systems. Now, hold on. We have lots of systems out there that are already essentially 100%. I mean, Norway is a country that effectively is 100%, but it's on hydro.
Oh.
I think you need to talk about 100% wind and solar. I think that's the real challenge.
Okay.
Etc.
And if you could change one rule in electricity markets tomorrow, what would it be?
If I could change one
rule in electricity markets tomorrow, what would it be?
From a purely sort of objective point of view, no price caps. Shouldn't have price caps.
Really?
Well, if you want a real market, you shouldn't have a price cap because that's a real market. But the reason we have price caps is because, again, electricity is not actually a sort of commercial. It is needed for life, etc.
Essential.
It's an essential. Therefore, politicians put price caps on them, and price caps cause enormous distortions in the whole thing. Now, the problem, of course, I said objectively, if you don't have price caps, then you'll get
extremely high.
You get extremely high prices. Well, no, maybe not. You might get lower costs at the end of the day, but you have extremely high prices at certain times, which are supposed to drive everything. But the problem with that is that real damage can be done to certain vulnerable people in society, and this is an endless sort of circle of this is an endless circle. Is that because it's not just like any old commodity? If you allow prices to go really high, then you damage people who are the most vulnerable in society, which is not a good thing. So it just goes round and round in circles. But I don't think they should. If you want a market, why do you have price caps? Price caps are not a market.
The market just fixes the price by itself.
Yeah, I mean, if you're down in London on High Street and you want to sell something at £50, you want to sell it at 100, put a price on it. It's up to you. No one can stop you. That's the real market.
Yeah. Will blackouts become more or less common in the long term?
I'm sure that's a question you've asked Yanis. Will they become more common? I think, yeah. Okay, you can't really answer that question because more relative to what in the world is changing, so it's probably very difficult to actually calculate it. But I think that this idea that, so I won't talk about blackouts, I'll just talk about adequacy, so to speak. I think that if the world was to have developed with no fossil fuels, so to speak, right, and only on renewables, I think what would have happened is society would have adapted to that. At the moment, society has been developed on the basis of 24/7, 365 days a year, being able to burn coal, oil, or gas and have electricity. If society had developed from a situation where it was dependent on wind and solar, for example, and they're variable, then it would have developed in a different way. And what point I'm trying to get to is that the idea of a blackout or not having enough electricity has come about in the basis of coal, oil, and gas been there all the time. But in a renewables world, I think there might be a situation whereby sometimes there's going to be a lack of wind and solar. The cost of storing it is so high that sometimes we just won't have it. But I think the society will just adapt to that. I don't think it's a major problem.
Well, that's an interesting thought. I've never really thought about it like that. What's one skill future power engineers must have that wasn't essential 20 years ago?
Been a politician.
And the final one, are you optimistic about the energy transition? Yes or no?
Yeah, I think it's a great. I think that, and I'm sure Yanis said the same thing. In some ways, I mean, I don't regret my where I am in my career, my age, whatever. You know, Yanis is approximately 10 years older than me. I'm in my mid-60s now. It is it is a tough area to be in for people like you, Fatter, but it is a very, very, there's going to be no lack of work and opportunity in the next 20 or 30 years. So I think it's an exciting time to be in this area, and I'll be very positive about it.
Okay, Professor Mark O'Malley, thank you so much for your
Thank you very much.
Really good.
Thanks, Fatter.